hi everybody, and welcome here today. So just a little bit more background on the Poems for Peace project. It was originally started by Latifa Termina in 2012, a SUBID member, and we're kind of revisioning this project. It's now a joint project with SICA USA and SICA Canada, and we've been having monthly readings of poets that we've invited in who aren't necessarily part of SUBID, but we think contribute to the Poems for Peace project. So just to introduce now, our featured reader today is Anne Graham Walker, who I've had the pleasure to get to know over the last, since the beginning of the pandemic. Actually, I think we've only met twice in person, and most of our times have been, I feel like I know her so well. It's so interesting. It's very much a wonderful product of the pandemic when you can get to know somebody on Zoom and on the phone. So Anne Graham Walker is a poet and journalist who has been published in several anthologies, including the Rock Salt anthology and Poems from Planet Earth, as well as various chapbooks edited by Canadian master poet Patrick Lane, and also a number of literary journals. Her chapbook, The Puzzle at the End of Love, published by Leaf Press in 2012, is out of print right now, but she's working at getting a second version published as part of a larger collection of her poems. And she's going to be reading a few poems from that chapbook today. She has been a finalist in the Prism Poetry Prize and the Malahat Open Season Awards and the Fiddlehead Review Poetry Prize in 2019. And she is a past president of the Federation of BC Writers. She is currently working on finishing and hopefully publishing her novel about growing up in Peronista, Argentina. She has lived in a new bay on beautiful Vancouver Island since 2002, across the street from an eagle tree, which is the perfect kind of location to have. So she has an MFA in creative writing from Goddard College and a BA in art history from Vassar. She lived in Davis from 1970 to 72, earning a master's degree in modern European history. So she's going to read, as I said, from her chapbook today, and also some very interesting poems that have been responses to the war in Ukraine, which I'm really looking forward to hearing, because I've been sort of part of that evolution of her poetry, and very, very happy to be part of that.
So everybody, so much, please welcome Adelia. I feel you give such beautiful intros. You do such a beautiful job, and I'm so happy that you're my friend now. It's just been wonderful getting to know you too. And thank you, SICA, for inviting me to read today. That's also a great honor. And thank you to my friends who turned up to hear me read. And you mentioned my MA in Modern European History, and one of my professors is in the audience today. So thank you, Bill, for coming today. So I like to just read. I don't like to talk a lot. I'm kind of shy, actually. So I'll just tell you just a little bit in general about what I'm going to read. I am going to start with a Ukraine poem, and I'm going to read to you from my chapbook, The Puzzle at the End of Love, which is a collection of stories about my family, which is a kind of a broken family because partly because I lived in Australia and Argentina and all over the world till I was 18, so they were unavailable to me, but also just within themselves, they were kind of a broken and scattered family because they also sort of migrated all over the place. So in my book, The Puzzle at the End of Love, I kind of try and bring them all together. And I also have some poems about my travels to different places, and I also will read some new poems. But I'll just give you, having just given you that general introduction, I'll just give you little short introductions as I read. And I'm going to start with one of my Ukraine poems. I've been really, obviously we've all been really touched and disturbed by the war, and I just felt compelled to, as a writer and poet and journalist, I felt compelled to write about it. This was actually the last poem I wrote about it. And one of the things that's really touched me about the war has been the old men. I've seen them on television who got left behind by their relatives who had more mobility, and the old men who were left sort of witness what's happened, you know, and it just seems so vulnerable to me. This poem is called What Got Left Behind. The old man wanders through what's left of Borodyanka, the place he was born and expected to die, lame and tattered, in rumpled gray clothes. He wanders these blocks, shell-gutted apartments. His neighbors lie dead in the rubble. Wanders the playground, grotesque, twisted metal, and the graveyard where his wife's bones remember. Sees her headstone, artillery blasted. The old man, 3 weeks under floorboards, blind as a mole in the cellar, with no heat or electricity and only a few puddles for water. He survived on his daughter's potatoes. She lays them in that cellar every year, but for winter, not for hell. Never imagining she'd leave her old father behind as she fled from the war with her toddler. Her backpack bulging with kid snacks and documents, and the calico kitten zipped in her hoodie. Lame old man. Did he want to be a survivor like this? The neighbor not raped or murdered by the Russian invaders? The well-hidden one left to remember a terror worse than death? Why didn't his old heart just fold up like a soft little grasshopper in that cellar? Startled by daylight, he stumbles into a TV cameraman's stand-up, his proud, life-lined face utterly broken. Look what they've done to my town. There were people living in there, and there, and there. The old man points, waving his arms and sobbing. Go home, says the TV cameraman, taking him by the shoulders. There's still shelling. Don't you hear it? Go home, old man. It's not safe here. But the old man won't go home. He says the shelling was worse there. Some Ukrainian soldiers arrive, fetch him to safety in a gardener's wheelbarrow, his legs dangling over the side like a boy's as they wheel him away. He points and calls towards the graveyard. Over there. She's over there. I was a radio producer and a journalist, so I think you'll probably notice there's a lot of, I like to tell stories in my poems. So this one I wrote when I went to Ireland with my husband for my father-in-law's funeral. In Ireland for Tom's funeral. Not raised in the country like you. All week I'd been calling them cows. Now, in the middle of the night, they got out of the pasture, thumping feet and fleshy noses pressed against our bedroom window. Be large, you asked of me. Be still in their path while you steered them back through the gate. 9 massive, terrified beasts rushing towards me in the dark. And it was early in our marriage, our baby in the house, the new one, my cantaloupe. They're not fucking cows, they're bullocks, you said. Stand still, they'll run around you. You, so certain your father's animals wouldn't trample. My heart pounding, less sure. Those years home before medical school, you watched as your father moved through them, not like St. Francis, like Tom. How he touched them, spoke their sounds, merged with the cattle so quietly. I'm really trying to read like very different poems today for you. But I think you'll notice that all my poems tend to kind of have an element of grief to them. And I was thinking about that. And I was thinking that's kind of traditional, that poetry's always, had kind of an element of grief to it. And I do a lot of writing. I'm a journalist. And when I'm a journalist, I I write all kinds of stories and a lot of information, but I guess when I go to the poem, I do kind of I'm always kind of in a state of grief. So I hope that's okay. But in a way, that's what's universal about it. And I think that's what binds us all together, no matter what color we are or who we are. And that's what makes a poem an agent of peace, why I'm here today. This comes from my chapbook, The Puzzle at the End of Love. And because I didn't really know my family that well because of my travels, I thought about them, and I thought about how they had all loved, especially since in my family the family came apart and the love was broken. And I thought about how my family had loved. I thought that was something I could sort of get a grasp on and was meaningful to me. So this poem is called 4 Generations of Love. There's one character in this poem, James, who I only know from a deed that was given to me, and I'm kind of obsessed with him. Anyway, 4 Generations of Love. Grandmother Grace smoked old golds, wore plaid shirtwaist dresses. She pasted coupons in booklets to get toasters and percolators. Once she ran away with a doctor from Omaha. It took her father to fetch her back to her marriage. Grace said, "Damn it," cable knitted, sipping Jack Daniels. She held her heart in regret. Grandfather Fred sold lumber, built houses, square, thrifty structures, wood-cladded and brick. He was generous with appliances, even after Grace had to be fetched. He bought her a 4-legged Maytag that lived in the basement, sudsed and agitated, didn't spin. Grace done in the earth smell of that half-finished cellar, shoving Fred's shirts through the lips of her wringer, the rollers turning in opposites, emitting an electrical hum. My father left that Nebraska to distribute Paramount movies all over the world. The townspeople nicknamed him Hollywood Bob. He proposed to my dazzling mother beside the canal in Honolulu, promised her maids, promised the equator, ditched her for a flight attendant 33 years later. Mother guarded her heart, a torn flap of skin. I wanted to fix it. I found my pioneer great-great-uncle, James, the harness maker, his signature scratched on a tea-colored deed. No picture. What if something of him continues in me? What if my face? The home smell of saddles and bridles. James would have known the rounded angles of a mare's chest and every hidden suture of her skull. He is true as an oak in a hummocky paddock, Dundas County, Ontario, 1871, his name scratched in the census. Gray woolen trousers, heavy with stable and neat's foot oil, hands calloused from gripping and cutting huge hides, stains on his fingers from the need of bone black and beeswax, how his skin worked that skin, bore the marks. 2 winter-coated horses stand still as lanterns beside him, a bay and a freckled gray, their solid, mud-splashed bodies. All February, their hooves indented the snow. Cupped moons, gradually forming a path, the way a harness maker follows the punch of his awl just by feel, his hand on the underside of the noseband. Under James' boot, in the ghosted out field, quartz, feldspar, mica, garnet, black limestone, the incomplete skeleton of a calcified white whale. The dogwoods are blooming right now. I wrote this last year when the dogwoods were blooming. I wrote this poem for people who were going through what we were going through this year when the dogwoods were blooming, people who can't express what, well, I'll just read it. It's called Before and After. There's 4 lines from William Carlos Williams, who sort of inspired the poem from Spring and All. And I thought it was interesting because he talks about the contagious hospital, and I'd been at the contagious hospital a lot, but the contagious hospital being COVID, right? By the road to the contagious hospital, under the surge of blue mottled clouds driven from the northeast, a cold wind. Those are William Carlos Williams's words. And these are my words. 4 a.m. I inhale coffee and drive you to the contagious hospital for more procedures and tests and more procedures and tests. Oh, this is your life now and our life. I've been saying that F word a lot lately. Just like when I was a teenager, wanting to show people I could. Like when I was a university student marching to the Pentagon, because killing Vietnamese babies and drafting American boys was so fucking insane. Now it's about having to say the word cancer every day, and that other word goes with it. The doctors at the contagious hospital have been trained in silos, worn out and hurting. They only read the parts of your chart that are addressed to their specialty. We've been learning to fend for ourselves. What happens to people too trusting to fend? Last week I sat in the car waiting for the MRI techs to image you. I watched COVID-masked people entering and leaving through the glass sliding doors. A big dogwood towered out in front. Spring's perfect white blooms with melanoma black centers, plush blooming in a Fibonacci spiral. 2 stubbly, hairy guys in Johnny shirts stood leashed to their IV poles and explosive green tanks. They were hacking and smoking close to the building under the scouring eye of 2 guards in black ninja suits who didn't have the heart to stop them. I fetched you from day surgery, wheeled you out through the doors like a baby, your bare head shaved and bald from the graft and excision. A fresh surgeon's circle, indented and round as a perfect full moon. Our life in 2 parts now, before the biopsy and after. All around these days, I see the other people like us, anonymous in the cashier lineup, arm in arm on the beach trail. Pretty much at the same time, I wrote a submission for the Caitlin Press anthology that just came out. You can see it here. Worth More Standing. The Arbutus trees have many host parasites, but they've been succumbing because they're so stressed because of the drought. My submission, which was published, is called Arbutus menziesii. People in the States that are watching, you have what you call it, the Madrona. Arbutus menziesii. You'd better not die this time. Chartreuse, soft-skinned bark all winter, more gouache than pastel in the rain. Now you've succumbed to that parasite again. In Snaunawas, all across the pillow basalt shelf, your shell-hard leaves, once broad, curl like cyprea, rattle and drop in death. But your fragrant cream flowers at the tips of black branches remind me, you survived a pandemic before. Sudden, tender clusters of new foliage. Now, we're going to go traveling. Am I going too fast? No. Right. So when I went to school in Australia, I still keep in touch with my friends, my school friends, and one of my friends, they kept their sailboat in Greece and would sail there in the Australian winters. And so we got to spend 2 weeks on their boat. This was in 2009. The first line is the title is the first line of the poem. I'm going to read 2 poems from that trip. We came by the Ionian Sea. Excuse me. We came by the Ionian Sea, so blue against the limestone cliffs. A snorkeled man in orange shorts searches for something wrecked. Sea urchins, fish shadows, garbage from a passing ship. This bay we're in is Abaliki, a slit in the skirts of Meganitsi. Hems and hems of olive trees slip-stitched with desiccated grass. In Varty town, white walls reflect the sun. Piebald, skewbald cats seek shade, dart after scraps. A tiny widow clutches a dustpan, unties a string-latched gate. Her black shawls, black shoes, black socks, black skirts. She has lost too many people, Stavros said. Tonight, she'll light oil lamps, bring food. She'll scrub her husband's grave, her son's. She will not speak. A widow has no status here without her men. This much I know. The evil eye is me. The widow turned away from my blue gaze. I know that little glass-doored shrine we saw nailed to a post contained 1 mug, 1 laced white baby's shoe, and a First Communion pamphlet. I know this blue-hulled ketch, this sundrop into liquid hills, this evening's drum bleat, returning sheep, the bone sound of their wooden bells. We also went to a place called Galaxidi, where I met some interesting people. I love writing about people. In a dream, not a dream, I revisit Galaxidi. This is actually a new poem. I wrote it based on some journal notes. All that cool May, we sailed through Greece, crewing a 60-foot yawl, steel-hulled, custom built as a getaway boat for an Argentine dirty war general. The water in Galaxidi is clear turquoise blue in the shallows, while the narrow streets slope downward, like an old woman rising to shake the crumbs off her lap. Widows and widows, wearing everything black, load up their string bags, the crow sounds of their haggling voices. My mission ashore is at the butcher's, where there's a butcher and a butcher's son. I ask Demetrios for a leg of lamb. He leaps from behind the counter, unhooks a whole dead lamb from his gut-cluttered shop window, upsets the buzzing flies, chooses a knife that slices easily through bones. That little lamb, a quadruped. Demetrios hacks off a hind quarter. Out comes the tibia, the fibula, out come the tight bands of ligament still stringy from running. Out comes the roundness, the lamb now a plane of flat tissue folded up in the butcher's quick hands as if a garment. He gives it to his son to wrap in shiny butcher's paper while he tidies the edges of the lamb's broken body. Hooks it back in the window, giving it back to the flies. I'm clutching my little packet of dead lamb to cook well in a fly-proof curry. 20 euros poor and in a hurry to escape. But Demetrios has decided to open his heart to me. You sail on boat. You see my son, Sebastian? He's building model boat. You get it for the lady, Sebastian. Sebastian is like a small darting fish, black-haired and wiry, with shy hands. He holds out his balsa boat, its hull delicately flared to port and to starboard, the details picked out in bright eggshell colors. That's a very beautiful boat, Sebastian. Demetrios, are you training Sebastian to be a butcher like you? Demetrios shakes his head. Sebastian, he no like being a butcher, but what I gonna do? He's my only son. I don't ask if his daughter might step in. I have 2 more poems. This first poem took me 10 years to write. I first wrote it in the 3rd person. And then I went and I did Betsy Warland's Vancouver manuscript intensive. I was working on the manuscript, which became my chapbook. She said, Anne, you got to jump into the fire. So I did. And many migraines later, I wrote it this way. And I'm reading this poem because I think I want to say that I think one of the things that poets have to do is write the hard poems. It's part of my job, and I guess I write them because I think you kind of do it for the people who can't say the things that a poet can say, because everybody's been through this stuff. The puzzle at the end of love. In a Miami hospital room, December palms blowing outside, you left your body behind. You slid out of your face, away from the institutional linens you'd pulled and twisted in your fingers and fists as if they might contain air. The man in ice blue pajamas pushing plastic tubes down your throat. All night you'd refused the IVs, the oxygen, asking us, why, what? Mother, it's emphysema. It's 5 million cigarettes doubling back like a posse. I didn't say that. I said, Mama, everything is okay. On a racing gurney, ceiling tiles flying overhead, you called out Dad's name. You commanded the orderlies to fetch Bob, 30 years gone, with his new wife in Texas. What would you have said to him? I went back to your apartment, opened and closed cupboard doors, diving for pearls in the well of your story. 84, but a lady. Your closet was still full of high pumps, the smell of cigarettes, Miss Dior in the dust. I found a yellow telegram in the drawer beside your bed. Dad returning from somewhere. He couldn't wait to see you. And a snapshot of the 2 of you, young in Acapulco, sparkling in new bathing suits. It fell out of your book, marking the pages. So I'm going to end with a happy poem. This poem was a finalist in the Malahat Open Season Awards in 2009, and I've submitted it to a few lit magazines, and nobody ever wants to actually publish it. Maybe it's too happy. You don't read too many happy poems in lit mags. You ever notice that? It's called The Edge of Light. I wrote it for my daughter. It happened like this. Knees up in the birthing room, I freed your breath. Awaiting first inhale, that fierce cry that will always be feral. Gloved hands returned you to my belly, my tight moon, now a pillowy landing, my swallowed sea, now a drained well. You found the food, guided by knowledge stranger than memory. Your body, salty, wet, slippery, emerged from its chrysalis. They laid you in a bassinet with clear sides like a fishbowl, your still blue eyes open, and all through first night, exhausted and tender, we gazed at each other, mystified by the radical shift in perspective. Your poking foot, now a soft apricot in my hand. Tell me about your journey through the edge of light, I whispered, right now, while you remember. I think I'm done.
Wow, thank you so much. That was absolutely beautiful. And I imagine that I'm not alone in feeling so moved by your stories. And I also, before I invite people to ask questions, I just want to say I loved what you said about the poet's job being writing the hard poems, that for other people in those same situations who don't have the words but will find them. I'm misquoting you badly, but I feel your big heart connecting to humanity in these poems. And I'm really moved by that. And you do it so beautifully. So thank you. That was really special.
Yeah, thank you, Anne. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So and now I'd love to invite other people to say anything they'd like to say, really, questions or comments.
And beautiful reading. Thank you for reading as part of this series. I like to talk to the poets. I'd like to get some sense of the connection between the art of writing poetry and poetry itself and peacemaking. So when you read your Ukraine poems, you're pointing out the horrors of the Russian invasion, the inhumanity of it. That's very clear. But then when you get into other material, it may not be as clear for some people who are more used to a direct, a more rhetorical treatment, perhaps, a more linear narrative, perhaps, I don't know. But there were a few moments when you were reading that I made notes of this. Your poem about the Arbutus, I'll say it the Canadian way. And to me, you are illustrating the what do they call it? Collateral damage of the war on nature in that poem, right?
Yeah.
And the story about the widow is collateral damage in the war on women in many cultures, and I would say North America among them. And, you know, the vessel once owned by the dirty war general, the spoils of war, suggesting that, you know, if you don't have an inner life, having nice boats and fancy dinners and concubines and that, all those are some of the spoils of war. So tell me about how you chose the poems to read here, and what the connection might be more directly for those who wouldn't understand.
Well, on one level, I chose the poems just because I wanted the poems to be different. I wanted there to be a variety. I didn't want to, if you think of piano notes, I didn't want to hit, you know, the same piano note over and over. I wanted there to be different piano notes. Because I think of poetry in kind of a musical way. And so I just wanted it to sound different, to be, you know, I thought of it in terms of the experience. But if you're asking me how the different poems are poems for peace, they are in all the ways you mentioned. But for me, also in my work, I think in my work, I'm working for peace in that I'm always looking to connect to people through building empathy. And when I was a radio producer, I did that too. I think that whenever you're telling a person's story, you're connecting to a listener And, when I'm writing poetry, I am still thinking about listeners. Just, I think really, if you ask me what's the most influential thing in my poetry writing, I think it's still my work as a radio producer. And I think of the person listening. And so if you're telling a person's story and building empathy, you know, um, by telling that story, I think you're doing piecework, because, that's how we become one humanity. I think that's important. For me, that's important work. Um, I think that it's something that we all understand, and I think it's important for all of us. And I think it's pretty basic right now, especially. So I think that pretty much all the poems I chose did have that element. They either spoke to an emotion that we all shared, or they they told a story about somebody vulnerable, like like that Ukrainian poem. I mean, a vulnerable old man. That's something you can. I mean, you can be overwhelmed by the war, but then you focus on an old man, a vulnerable old man, and that's something you can grasp and something you can connect with emotionally.
Yeah, similar to that,
Did I answer your question? Yeah.
Absolutely. And it was a beautiful answer. And I saw that Bill had his hand up. I defer to Bill.
Oh,
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, of course, the problem with war is that the opposite party thinks that it's righteous and necessary to wage it. And, the challenge is to connect to that point of view. And I don't claim to know how to do it, but I have been reading a Ukrainian novel that was written in Russian that the New York Times recently praised. It's by an author named Andrei Kurkov, called Gray Bees. And gray refers to the no man's land in the Donbass in the east between the warring armies. And the protagonist is a Russian speaker who does not identify with the Ukrainian side, but is not either a impassioned pro-Russian. He's kind of a man sitting on the fence and taking solace in being a beekeeper. And I do recommend the book. It's a gripping story that deals a lot with the ambiguities of loyalty in Ukraine. And interestingly, by focusing on the population that sees itself as Russian speakers and with a certain, bias in that direction, but it doesn't rule out their devotion to Ukraine as a country. It's just ambiguous. And of course, there's a lot of fighting going on. But I mean, I think how you bridge that gulf between two sides that see themselves as legitimized, morally legitimized in doing what they're doing is extremely hard. But I think conjuring with those ambiguities does help. People are very confused about Ukrainian identity because it doesn't easily map onto linguistic differences.
Yeah.
And also in the present conflict, what the Russophone element in Ukraine is up to is a little bit obscure. We're not getting much news on that front, but I think a certain disintegration of the connection to Moscow is breaking down, even while so many of the Ukrainian Orthodox churches retain their connection to the metropolitanate there in Moscow rather than in Kyiv. Still, I think it's going down. Ukraine is a country that's coming to a very late national birth.
Yeah.
we have about 10 more minutes. but we don't have to use it if we don't want to.
I could read my poem about the beekeeper.
Oh yeah,
Should I do that?
I think that'd be a nice
Yeah.
ending to the event.
yeah.
I'll do that. I'll just have to drink some water. The poem I wrote about the old man, I just saw the picture of the old man in the news frame, but I obviously had to sort of kind of make up his story, well, from different stories I found. But this poem was pretty much a gift of a news report I saw of a newsman who sort of parked himself in this hospital for the afternoon. And these were the people that came in. This was early in the war, in March. Afternoon, this is a Brovary, this is just north of Kiev. This is before the horrible stuff at Bucha, or before we knew about it. Afternoon at the Brovary Central Hospital, March 26, 2022. Dmitry Mulyar, the beekeeper, 44 with 3 children, tending his bees outside his home in East Kiev when the Russian shell hit, his brother Andrili beside him. I brought Dmitry straight to the hospital, but he died along the way. These so-called liberators, they're not people, they're not even animals. Andrili Mulyar, a coffee roaster. Now he must help Dmitry's family decide whether to stay with the bees or move to a safer place. Yaroslav Zraitel, the hospital surgeon, sent his wife and kids to a town in the west. Now he stays at the hospital, sleeping and eating between constant surgeries. In the first week, we'd hide. For hours, we'd hide when we heard the blasts. Now we just wait to hear the siren. And if there are no explosions, we continue with our work. Zina Kilko, the midwife, brought her husband to Brovary Central, his leg blasted off by a drunk Russian soldier. She said the soldiers had taken over their house, kept them captive 2 days, stole their money, stole their clothes, their laptop with Zina's pictures of the grandkids. There was disagreement among the soldiers. 3 of them eventually took pity on us and let us seek medical attention. Igor Rupstov, homeless for a decade, feeding stray cats and dogs on the street where he lives when he was hit in the legs by a shell. I was falling. It was hard. I felt dizzy, but I had to get to the ambulance somehow. I did not want to die. Igor's legs have been bandaged. He has a bed, a roof over his head, as long as the Russians don't target the hospital. How they do, how they might have by now.
That was beautiful. Sad, tragic, and
Yeah. Really want to thank you guys for coming today and giving me the honor of reading my poems for you and listening so attentively. It's the biggest honor anybody can give a poet to do that. So just thank you very much.
Thank you.
A minute for any more comments, or are we closing down?
we have a bit of
Oh,
time for more comment.
Hannah.
Hannah, if you want to comment.
I'd just like to say thank you. I'm probably one of the people here who is not a poet. I'm a visual artist, and I'm a member of SICA and a member of Subud, and I hesitated whether I would listen in this morning because I was in the middle of doing a painting that I was quite absorbed in, but something told me to listen, and your poems have touched me more than so many poems that I've heard. And I often find myself just drifting my attention away, but I've been riveted by your poems. And I want to thank you for sharing them with us today. you're obviously a very good writer and a very good poet. And
So much, Ramona.
I need to learn more about poetry, but I do know a good one from one that's not so good. So thank you.
Such a nice thing to say. Thank you so much.
And I just want to add my thanks.
Hello,
So,
Wendy.
it took me back over the years where I remember when you were writing some of these. And so it's lovely to hear a whole unfolding. It's very hard, I know, to in one reading cover all that territory, but you've done it beautifully, and it's lovely to hear you read again. So I thank you very much.
Wendy's a wonderful poet. It's great to have her here. I love to go to her readings and hear her read her work. Hello, Leah. Thank you, Wendy. And
thank you everybody for coming today. I really appreciate it. This has been a really lovely reading, and I don't think we could ask for more than that. So many thanks to everybody, and thank you to Andrew for being our tech person.
Thanks very much, and thank you so much, Anne. You really are a masterful storyteller. Your stories pull me in, and in some cases they pull me under. So thank you so much. Yeah, this ZoomMuse session will be edited and we posted on our YouTube channel. And we do have a public YouTube channel, SICA, SICA, Subud International Cultural Association. Go to YouTube and search for ZoomMuse Poems for Peace, or just search for Poems for Peace. They've got a really good search engine there, and all of our sessions will pop up. Bye, everyone.